Excellent.
There you go. Sorry.
No worries. Excellent. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Bridgewater Town Council meeting, the first one of 2022. It is Tuesday, January 4th, 2022 at 7 o'clock. I'd ask that we all please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America,
and to the
and to the republic
which
for which it stands,
one nation,
one nation, under God, indivisible,
justice
with
for all.
liberty and justice for all.
We do have no condolences this evening, but I would like to take a moment of silence in recognition of all those veterans and military members and first responders who have passed.
I don't care.
Okay, I'll watch it now.
You can go ahead. Yeah.
Okay, this meeting is being aired live and recorded pursuant to Section 20 of Chapter 20 of the Acts of 2021, an act relative to extending certain COVID-19 measures adopted during the state of emergency. This meeting of the Town Council for the Town of Bridgewater will be fully remote and accessible to the public through remote participation to the greatest extent possible. There will be no in-person attendance permitted, and citizens wish to tune in to the meeting may do so via Zoom or Facebook Live. First item on the agenda is approval of the minutes from our previous meeting, December 21st, 2021.
Motion to approve.
Second?
Second.
Council Chase? Okay. Any discussion on the minutes? I don't see any, so I'll move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
It's 8-0.
Thank you. Next item on the agenda is announcements from the president. I do not have any. Next item on the agenda is proclamations. We have none this evening. Next item on the agenda is citizens open forum. I would open it up to any citizens wishing to speak during citizens open forum. I see Dr. Hunt with his hand raised.
Hi. Greetings. I just wanted to congratulate Eric Moore on developing a vision statement for the town council.
Dr. Hunt, can you just state your name and address,
Great
please?
move. It's a good start for
Dr. Hunt,
beginning with an end in mind, and I think that's fantastic. That said, the town council must carefully consider it and ensure the consistency with the hopefully to be adopted master plan by the planning board. In other words, they have to be in sync in some level. To that end, I encourage the town council to facilitate public input on this council-focused vision statement. Thank you very much.
thank you, Dr. Hunt. Ed Ovaldi, if you could just name and address, please.
Thank you, Mr. President. Ed Ivaldi, Boxwood Lane. As we begin the new year, I'd like to first thank all of you for your service to the town and also recognize your families as well, since they too make sacrifices for the town when you yourselves are serving as counselors. Your time and efforts to improve our town are much appreciated by all of us who understand what you deal with day in and day out. So thanks again. Looking into 2022, I feel it's important to remind you all that as elected officials, your primary role is to serve the citizens of Bridgewater. As such, it's important that when you make legislative decisions, you proactively reach out and listen to your constituents. When you vote on something that is important to the future of our town, you shouldn't be letting your personal preferences be the only guiding reason for your vote. Rather, your votes should primarily be based on and include input from citizens. If you have not connected with your constituents in the past as a counselor, then you need to start doing it this year. Whether holding periodic face-to-face meetings, as some counselors do, or simply reaching out to your constituents via email, it is your job to understand how the people you represent feel on issues. before you take any votes. One of the concerns people had when we changed our form of government back in 2010 was that they would lose their voices without having a town meeting. Since the 9 of you have replaced town meeting as the legislative body, it is critical more than ever that citizens' voices still be heard. And that means not just by speaking during public comment at town council meetings, but by having periodic dialogue with their elected officials. This won't just happen on its own, but needs to be initiated by you. In fact, the Charter Review Committee has recommended additional language in the charter that addresses this specific issue. As you consider what lies ahead this year, I encourage you all to get creative and purposefully engage with your constituents. I can assure you that the results of doing so will improve the quality of the legislative decision-making process and ultimately will help our town fully achieve its short and long-term goals. Thank you for your time.
Thank you. Do we have any other citizens for citizens open forum wishing to speak? I can't help but to look at Susie Robinson's profile because it looks like she's constantly raising her hand to speak. So it's kind of funny. I assume she doesn't want to.
That's me waving hello.
Good evening. All right. Looks like we'll move on from that. Okay. Next item on the agenda is appointments. We have none this evening. Moving on to hearings, we also have none. Moving on to license transactions. First license transaction is A, petition P 2022-008, annual renewal taxi cab license. I will defer to the town manager just for a brief update.
Thank you, Mr. President. This license is application renewal license. Renewal for license application did not come in until after the deadline passed for your last meeting. So this is simply an annual renewal of the one taxi license that we issue.
Excellent. Thank you. Motion to approve.
So moved.
We have a second. Okay. Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
That's 9-0.
Thank you. Moving on, license transactions B, petition P 2022-009, annual renewal antique dealer. Again, defer to the town manager.
You're on mute.
Michael, you're on mute.
You're on mute.
My apologies. Again, Mr. Brazil is just seeking renewal of his license, and the application came in after your deadline for the last meeting.
Okay,
Motion to
excellent.
approve.
We have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
That's 9-0.
Thank you. Under license transactions C, petition P 2022-010, annual renewal, secondhand gold pawn shop. Defer to the town manager.
Platinum Scrap and Recycling is also a renewal, and same thing. It came in after your deadline.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
9-0. 9-0.
Thank you. Under license transactions D, petition P 2022-011, annual renewal common vic. I'll again defer to the town manager.
Mr. President, this should be the last of your renewals. It's Bridgewater House of Pizza and Roach Brothers Supermarkets, both seeking renewal.
Approve.
Do you have a second?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? Seeing none, move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood, and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
It's 9-0.
Thank you. Moving on to presentations. We have no presentations this evening. Moving on to the town manager's report. First item A, Mitchell School update. Defer to the town manager.
Mr. President, very little other than steady as she goes to report on the Mitchell School. Work does continue as planned and on schedule, I learned today. Again, mechanicals are being worked on, electric, plumbing, rough plumbing, boilers are being set in place, brick veneer on the exteriors going up and is ongoing, will be ongoing as the weather permits. Drywall on the interior is going up in select places, and some interior painting has begun. Timeline, as I said, is good and continues to be a projected completion date of July of 2022. The next meeting of the Mitchell School Building Committee is Tuesday. This will be an oddball because it's on a Tuesday, not a Monday, but it's Tuesday, January 11th at 6:30 via Zoom. And again, bridgewaterschoolproject.com for anybody that's interested in any of the background and any of the minutes of meetings and so forth, any information. So happy to answer any questions on that one.
Okay, thank you. Any questions from the council? Okay, I don't see anyone, but as a reminder, we do have a scheduled tour on Saturday. And I think it would be helpful for all the members of the council, if you can make it, just to see the incredible amount of work that's happened on that site over the last year. And thank you to the town manager for putting it together. Okay, moving on, item B, COVID-19 update.
COVID-19 update, our official numbers, I guess that's what I call it. The numbers that we received from the state remain steady at about 112 reported cases. We don't have any reported hospitalizations that we know of. And as I did have over the past few meetings, should warn again, as home test kits become more prevalent, these numbers become increasingly unreliable. And that's because unless there's a voluntary reporting to DPH of a positive home test, generally those numbers don't get reported anywhere. So right now, unlike when the pandemic first struck us back in March, April of 2020, now we don't put a lot of faith in the numbers that DPH is reporting, just because we believe that the actual numbers are far greater. So I think everybody understands that. Our vaccination rate is steady, 62%, and for fully vaccinated, 68% with at least one shot. And we do, for customers coming into town buildings, we continue to strongly recommend that people wear masks when visiting town offices. We have re-implemented a mask requirement for employees in town offices. And we've also shifted to what we call a split shift model, meaning that we are going to make every effort to make sure that all of our offices are open, but that we have limited staff in the actual office, and that we switch and rotate people to work from home. And this is due, quite frankly, this is due to the number of cases that we've had among staff, and realizing that we want to make sure that we do whatever we can to keep offices open. So we've switched back to that model. Probably not for any more than the next 3 weeks. That's what we're hoping. On test kits, I know a number of counselors have asked, and a lot of residents have been calling to find out if we have any additional test kits. We received, I think, 8,400 some odd test kits and distributed those over a 2-day period some time ago, a couple of weeks ago, I believe it was now. The state, I can tell you the state has negotiated purchase agreements with home test kit suppliers. And we are ordering what we can through that program. And as we did with the last round, we'll definitely notify town residents through both our website and social media sites that those tests are available and how to get them when they arrive. There's probably at least a several-week lead time on those. So as soon as I have more information, excuse me, I'll report that, send that out. But that is what I have on COVID. Happy to answer a question.
Okay, thank you very much. Council Moore.
Great, thank you. Through you to the town manager. I'd just be curious. I know one of the challenges people are facing right now is actually getting the home test kits. And I think people, when they arrive at CVS, will go in and buy, I don't know, 6 or 10 or something, or whatever the max is, and take them. And I'm just curious, having just distributed 8,000, I think in a day or two, did we learn anything from that process that would lead us to distribute them in a different manner if we get more in the future?
Quite honestly, I think the distribution went well. We did place a restriction on the numbers. We asked people for, at least we started out asking people for their name and address so that we could track where these things are going, which is something that was asked by the state, which makes perfect sense. In the future, we probably will try to disperse the distributions more than we did. We did have them at, we distributed through the Housing Authority, the Senior Center, the library, the 2 fire stations, and the police station. By far, most people went to Fire Station 1 headquarters, and that proved to be a bit of a zoo. So we would probably try to distribute or disperse the distribution sites a little more and try to centralize a database. But other than that, I think those were pretty much the lessons learned.
Great, thanks. I appreciate the town jumping in to help out there. Great, thanks.
Thank you. Any other questions from the council? Okay, thank you. Moving on, item C, community comparisons report.
All right, well, thank you for giving me a little bit of time. What I'd like to do is just go over a comparison report that I've done for the council. And let me just try to share my screen here, share the right screen. And I'll walk you through this. All right, I think everybody can see the screen labeled community comparison report. And as a way of a little bit of background, I generate a report every several years, just sort of try to compare us to what our neighbors and comparable communities are doing and how we rank according to those communities. And this year, several councilors had asked me to sort of go through it in a council session. So here I am doing that. I will remind you that it's a very high level review. It's something I do on my own, quite frankly, based on information that's provided by the DOR. So all of the comparisons here are generated from information that comes directly from the DOR website, public information. You can certainly go on and download any amount of information that you want and do the same kind of exercise that I have. So we selected a list of comparable towns, which you see here, based on a filtering through 4 different metrics that are commonly used and readily available from the DOR. So one is population. The next would be average single family tax bill, and then income per capita, and then equalized valuation per capita. And for each of those metrics, we looked at cities or towns that were between 80% and 120% of Bridgewater's value. And then we got a core group out of that analysis. We got a core group of 8 towns, which we call the core group. You'll see, and that core group is Dracut, Middleborough, Milford, North Attleboro, Northampton, Saugus, Stoughton. there's a little asterisk by Easton because they did not make the trip through that matrix, trip through that analysis. But it is so often used by our own residents as sort of comparison that we added that one in as well. So in addition to that core group, we added towns that were directly border Bridgewater to see how we compare with our neighbors. And those are obviously Halifax, East Bridgewater, Rainham, and West Bridgewater. Since Middleborough, who's also our neighbor, appeared in the core group, we did not add them in as part of the neighboring towns. They're part of the core group. I don't have too many slides, just by the way, in case you're wondering. Just as sort of a quick picture, quick snapshot of what the analysis told us. Generally, Bridgewater's total spending per capita, general fund spending per capita, is about 33% beneath the average of the core group, and about 40% below the average of our neighboring communities. Bridgewater's education expenditures rank pretty much lowest among our neighbors and the core group. We spend about 23% less than the 8 core communities on education, about 30% less than our neighbors on average. Let's see, police funding ranks about average relative to the core communities, and about 25% below our neighbors' average. And finally, Bridgewater, on public works, as you could probably imagine, we spend less than half on public works as other towns in the core comparison group, and about 60% less than our neighbors do on average. And it's not a bullet point on this page, but it's worth noting on culture and recreation, which is a grouping that DOR makes. I'm not making up these groupings. It's a grouping that these are all groupings that DOR makes. We spend half of what the core communities spend, and surprisingly, we spend slightly more than our neighbors. So that was a surprise to me, and I have not been able to dive in to see why that is and analyze our neighbors a little more carefully on that regard. But I thought that was an interesting take. So just overall spending, I think this graph gives you an idea. In all the general fund expenditure areas, we rank pretty much last of all the communities in per capita expenditures. When compared to the core group of similar communities, our core group, we were about 34% less. And you can see our expenditures of about $2,172 per person in Bridgewater, and just by Rainham, our neighbor, our partner with the regional school district, we're about $700 or so, a little more than that, less than Rainham. Surprisingly, West Bridgewater per capita expenditures is enormous, and they're at about $4,617 per capita. I mentioned education, and here you can just sort of see it in the graph form. Our per capita spending for education ranks on a ranking, ranks second to last. Saugus is slightly less than Bridgewater spends on average, expends per capita on education. These are per capita spending, so this is not per pupil, it's per capita spending. And so when compared to our neighboring towns, we're about 30% less than the average of those neighboring towns. So diving into public works a little bit, Bridgewater ranks almost last of all 12 comparison communities. second only to close second to North Attleboro. But otherwise, I think the graph sort of tells the picture of where public works spending is on the other towns. And it's not shown on a graph. I didn't translate it to graph form, but the per road mile, which is another analysis that you can do, public works spending per road mile. It's not quite as useful a figure, but that one is, we're about 30% less than our neighbors on a per road mile basis. Other comparisons, so I looked at debt service and reserves. In terms of debt service, we don't have a lot of debt service. Now, these are numbers based on the close of fiscal 2020, so that the new Mitchell School will be reflected next time I do this analysis. The Mitchell School will probably make this graph look like we're about where Halifax is. Halifax is right here. And after the Mitchell School is figured in, our debt service per capita will be roughly in that neighborhood. The tiny one here, I know the writing is pretty small, but the tiny one here is Rainham. West Bridgewater is up here, and Bridgewater is right in there. And reserve comparisons, I think we've obviously, with the council's help, we've made very concerted effort to build reserves, and Bridgewater's reserves have gotten a lot better. We essentially had nothing a number of years ago, and now we're at about 10% of stabilization for our budget. We've got capital stabilization, we've got free cash. So the combined free cash and stabilization funds are used in this calculation, and we're about 198 per capita. Again, Saugus a little lower than we are at 109 per capita, and then obviously skews the graph, but Rainham is about $1,883 per capita there. So while we're doing a good job, we're doing a great job in terms of building reserves. As a per capita, it is not, we're not quite where our comparable towns are. So just in terms of takeaways, I think, the report, and I've only highlighted some of the features of the report for the sake of ease, but the report is designed, I think, to give you a very quick snapshot of where Bridgewater stands relative to its peer communities and its neighbors. And again, it's a challenge. It's always a challenge to try to get good data to use here, but I think we've done a pretty good job using DOR data and trying to present it in a very straightforward way. Overall, as I point out here, we operate on less revenue than most every other city or town in the state, bar maybe 12, mostly in the western part of the state. And we do this because of the strategies that we've developed, and certainly with the help of the council throughout the years. But a few of those strategies are: we hire the very best people we can, who excel at their work. We have very high expectations for people coming on board at all levels. We actively engage and challenge our people to learn more. We take training very seriously. We drill in individual and team accountability constantly. So that's one area, one strategy that we've used to provide the services we do. We've also, as you all know, because you've seen it and you've been active partners with it, we keep our financial house in pretty tight order. From budget resolution, council's budget resolution, through budgeting, through capital, through performance, we treat it as pretty much a seamless process, and that has borne some fruit. Really key to a lot of our ability to operate with pretty slim revenues, pretty slim budgets. We've broken down department silos as best we can. We challenge people to think of service delivery in different ways. And I often say the 7 worst words in our business are because we always did it that way. And whenever I hear that, little red flag goes off, because that's not the way we operate. And we've honestly been able to finally create a true DPW, which has been working hard to provide us with some comprehensive road infrastructure plans, which you will see shortly. And finally, we work functionally and cross-functionally. We constantly say that. We make sure that all the stakeholders, regardless of what area they represent, have a seat at the table when we introduce new processes or initiatives or projects for that matter. But we also try to make sure that the departments have what they need to accomplish the basic service delivery mission that they have. So those really sort of the reasons that we've been successful in trying to operate within the constraints of money. And as I often say, it's when we interview people or when we introduce people to the town, the fact that we're on some levels quite proud of the fact that we can operate on such slim revenues, but we also have been very thoughtful about getting the best bang for the buck, best bang for the taxpayer buck as we can. And I think I've highlighted sort of the very broad level of community comparison report, the very broad takeaways from the community comparison report. But again, I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you to the town manager. Do we have any questions from the council? Councilor Moore.
Great. Through you to the town manager. Thank you. It's great to see the numbers. Really appreciate it. Maybe as a follow-up for a future presentation, it would be great to see the benefit side of the equation too. So although our costs are low, if the service delivery part is also low, that's a very different sort of result than if our costs are low and we have like the best school in the state, right? So it'd be interesting to maybe kind of map these to, here's how much we spend, and then here's what we get for the money versus what Middleborough gets and what Easton gets. So if we could add that in a future session, that would be helpful. Thanks.
Be happy to.
Great.
Councilor Wood.
Thank you. Yeah, I too look forward to digging down into some of the numbers. Through you to the town manager, Michael. Out of the 8 comparisons communities, which do you think is closest in approximation to Bridgewater? And I asked the question because as you were going through the per capita numbers, it struck me that Bridgewater is probably 20,000 people larger than West Bridgewater. And so there's a base spend that you have to do. They have a new high school and some other pieces going on that kind of drives up their cost. But what, out of that grouping, which would you say is the closest community?
That's a good question. Probably not any, definitely not any of our neighboring communities.
So I might throw in then, it might be interested in the next comparison to add 1 or 2 other communities that are about the same size and structure similar to Bridgewater, just to do a comparison with that neighborhood as well.
I'd be happy to do that. In fact, if any counselor has, wants to give me a name of a city or town to run that same comparison, I'm happy to do that. But I'll see if I can find comparable, population comparables and at least present that.
Great, thank you. That's it.
Any other questions or comments from the council? Okay, I don't see any. Michael, thank you very much for the presentation. I think it's extremely helpful. I have a couple of just quick asks as a follow-up. One, to just make sure we can get it on the town's website, but more importantly, where I think people are actually getting information in 2022 is on the town's Facebook page. This presentation would be nice to see that up there as well.
Sure.
And I think it would also be helpful when you get to slides and you're talking about reserves and you mentioned stabilization and free cash. If I could ask that you could just provide a brief explanation of what that is so that when citizens are looking at that, they're not familiar with municipal budgeting, that they'd have an idea of where all that money is and where it's coming from. So if you just expand upon it, that would be great. I think it's really eye-opening just to see how we compare with some of these other communities and where we're spending money. So I appreciate all the effort. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, moving on to discussions. We don't have any this evening that I see. Committee reports. Do you have any committees that would like to report? Don't see anything there. So I'm going to move to legislation for action. First item A, Ordinance D FY 22-018, General Ordinance, amended Article 10, Section 10-7, time of taking effect. I know there might be some possible amendments, so I'm going to defer to Councilor Chase if you would like to speak on it at all.
Thank you, Mr. President. And yes, in fact, we are tonight to consider some edits, which some of which were offered to us from Town Attorney Jason Rollins. Deborah, do you have the markup of the edited ordinance?
Oh, this is perfect.
Yes, I just put it up. Can you see it?
Excellent. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, there it is.
I think we've discussed a number of these, I think, in the past, and we actually decided to continue this item to this evening. The very first item that is substantial is the date of the town election, which was incorrectly stated in the original proposed ordinance as April 30th. Of course, it takes place on April 23rd. And that was one of the more significant edits. As Attorney Rollins himself has characterized his edits in the past, these are largely stylistic edits. And he's really just very generously devoted time to make these proposed edits to bring the ordinance into a little better shape for us. But what otherwise you see is substantially similar to the ordinance that was actually enclosed with your packet this evening. I don't know if there are any particular questions or issues that councilors may have with respect to this, but I'm certainly available for my part to answer any questions.
No question.
Oh, apologize. Councilor Gallagher.
Thank you. Through you to Mr. Chase, Councilor Chase, and Councilor Wood. April 23rd, 2022 is obviously there'll be an election on that day. Do you think this will all happen for the councilors' election by April 23rd or not?
Do you guys want me to answer that? I probably would have a better answer than them. Yeah. So
thank you.
There's been some communication with Senator Pacheco and State Rep D'Amelia, and I'm thinking, and again, don't quote me on it because this is just what I'm hearing, that this could take longer. And so I have had communications with our town clerk as well, just to let her know that if it does take longer, they can plan on their elections as they currently can have, and that, you know, you all would hold over under the current charter until these charter revisions can make it through the state legislature. As you know, we're all going to push for it. We're going to make, the biggest push we can make to get them to do something on it. But apparently, my understanding is there's a pretty good backlog of legislation up there right now.
So with this legislation becoming pending, then we would not need to hold those that are naturally up on April 23rd up. Then?
Right.
They would be holdovers. They would.
Right, that exactly. So my intention is obviously without there being a new charter in effect, right? We have to continue to operate under our current charter, which basically fortunately allows for holdovers, right? We've had that happen before. So I think the other election can obviously occur, and there are new precincts, which is great because the map was approved. But I think this, as it relates to this stuff, we're just going to have to play it by ear. I think we're going to do as much as we can. I know the town clerk's going to talk to who she can. I know I'm certainly going to do the same and package all this up quickly and neatly. But yeah, I think it's just going to be a holdover situation until we hear back from the state. And Councilor Gallagher pretty well, the charter changes can sit up there for a little bit.
Yeah.
So hopefully they don't, but yeah, that's kind of where we're headed.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Why don't we go ahead and entertain a motion to approve, and we'll get a second for further discussion.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Okay, Counselor Chase.
Yes.
You have anything to say?
Was that a good response?
Okay,
It was Wood that made the motion, but that's okay.
that's okay. I just wanted him to have an opportunity to speak again, but Counselor Ward, go ahead.
I just point out, because April 23rd has been moved around here, but it's the last Saturday in April is our election normally, and that is the 30th in the next year. So the dates there on the amendments are correct now. And, the language, as Attorney Rollins has said, within 180 days plus, that makes sense.
Counselor Perry.
Thank you. Actually, to Attorney Rollins, Jason, do we specifically need to have the date listed in this ordinance, or can we leave it more open-ended by just saying the next available annual town election?
Yeah, I don't think you do need to have the specific date. I think maybe the original intent of Mr. Chase and Mr. Wood was just, to shoot for that date, maybe put a little heat on the state legislature to have, that date looking them in the eyes. But whether or not that has any, indirect effect, I don't know. That's actually why I added the 180-day language, which kind of actually mirrors what we had done way back when the first time around, right? When there was a changeover from selectmen to counselors, there was a certain time period by which, the election could be held. So I tried to mirror some of that just to give us that flexibility.
But if we don't end up meeting or be able to
We're
do
fine.
that date, it's okay. It doesn't need to come back to us to edit.
No,
the
because
design.
I drafted it, the edit in such a way that if it doesn't meet that date, then we have a certain amount of time, which, I wanted to make sure it was sufficient for the town's clerk's office to get things together. And, if you guys have to call a special election or whatever, I just kind of worked it within that kind of time frame.
Okay, that was just my biggest question as far as
Sure.
vote on this. Thank you.
Yep.
I would certainly say not really in favor of amending out the date, because I feel, to Attorney Rollins's point, that it puts the town on a definitive timeline, at least at the State House, that we have a date that we're trying to meet. So hopefully it would get moved through quicker than putting nothing and having it open-ended. Councilor Moore.
Great. Thank you, Mr. President. I'm not sure who this question goes to, so maybe it's just more of a discussion point. But if I think about what people need to do to prepare for that election, we either have 3 people going out and getting signatures or 8. And I'm wondering, at what point does it become too late, even if it gets approved by April 1st, let's say? At what point does it become too late for candidates to kind of pull themselves together and prepare for that election? So I think just as a future discussion point or consideration, we as a council should sort of figure out, even if it does get approved, is there a no later than date where we would, want to make sure we give people time to prepare for an election?
And obviously we should wait to hear back from the state legislature on that, but I know the town clerk, in terms of her collecting of papers, I would say the first week in February would be probably the last possible date. I think in my discussions with her, it was either the first or second week, but I think at that point, it starts to get very difficult for her to put together an election, right? So I would say if we're into February at all, it's going to look pretty difficult for candidates and for the town clerk's office to put something together. But that's just based on my discussions with her.
Great, thank you.
Any other members of the council for discussion? And seeing none, so we have a second, and we're talking about the amended proposed ordinance. So if there's no further discussion, I'll move for a roll call vote.
Amendments.
So moved.
Second, Mr. President, we're going to vote on the amendments first and then the full measure. Okay, great.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
All right, that's 9-0.
Okay, so those amendments are approved. Now we're voting on the full ordinance. We already have a second, so I'll move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
9-0.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, under old business, we have none listed. Under new business, first item is A, Order 0 FY 22-036, acceptance of donation, local resident, defer to the town manager.
Mr. President and councilors, this was a bequest, I believe, that came from a decedent. The bequest is to the fire department. And I would encourage you to refer it. It's for the amount of $27,278.84 from the estate of Richard Haynes. And I would encourage you to refer to Budget and Finance Committee.
Okay, thank
Motion
you.
to send to Budget and Finance Committees?
Okay, we have a second.
Second.
Any discussion? Seeing none, I'll move for a roll call vote.
Mr. Columbotus,
No.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
and Mr. George.
Yes.
It's 8-1.
Okay, thank you. Moving on, next item is B, Order 0 FY 22-037, acceptance of a donation, Chuckrin's Auto Parts, defer to the town manager.
Again, Mr. President, Chuckrin's Auto Parts has donated $10,000 in order for or to offset the cost of installing cross-reflective identification markers on fire hydrants throughout town. So I encourage you to refer to Budget and Finance Committee.
Motion to send to Budget and Finance Committees?
Second.
Okay, any discussion? I'll just add a quick thank you to Chuckrin's Auto Parts. They've been an incredible business in town, making donations like this repeatedly to the fire department. Very excited to see these reflectors come in town. If you drive through the town of Rainham, highly reflective stickers on all the fire hydrants. It'll be a big safety improvement for the town. I appreciate it. With that, I'll move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
And Mr. Columbotus?
No.
That's 8-1.
Okay, next item is item C, order 0 FY 22-038, capital plan fall 2022. I'll defer to the town manager.
Mr. President, as you and the council, I'm sure remember, I had asked that you pull the previous capital order because of mostly some changes to the school district's capital plan. Those changes are incorporated here, as well as some edits and amendments, but essentially a very similar capital plan with the exception of those district requests, which I think are the only change for the district request was the track rather than the tennis court. And we also took one item away, so a couple of items away. One, the fire station, because we will probably go to a debt exclusion vote for and also another vehicle that was purchased with CARES funding came off the list. So I encourage you to refer this again to Budget and Finance Committee.
Motion to send to Budget and Finance Committees.
Second.
Okay, do we need to send this to advertising at all?
And I would ask at the same
Yes.
time, if you would be willing to send that to advertising, I would request that as well.
Point of information, doesn't that have to come back from us before it goes to advertising in case there are any changes or proposed changes within that? Wouldn't it be a little early, wouldn't it?
That would make sense.
Yeah, if you would choose to wait until you make sure that there aren't any dramatic changes to the plan.
That's fine. We'll go ahead and do that. We have a second. Is there any other discussion? Okay, seeing none, I just have one quick question for the town manager.
Mr. President, just a quick question, sorry.
Sure, Council Moore.
Yeah, real quick. I was wondering if you could just describe the purpose of the video system for the town common. I did have someone ask me if I'd heard about that. Could you just mention that?
Well, I think as most of the counselors know, over the years, we've had a number of auto accidents. Many of them, or several of them, have been hit and run accidents. This is an attempt to capture those accidents on tape, so that when those happen, we can recoup from the driver's automobile insurance rather than from taxpayer funds.
Great, thank you.
And I just had two quick follow-ups now that Council Moore brought up the cameras. I would ask that we think about having a camera policy for the town about what we're doing with the data, where it's stored, what it would be used for and not used for. I understand accidents at this point, which I fully support. But, if we adapted license plate readers or something to that effect, I just want to have a townwide policy to be considered on camera use. The second piece is just a quick question on the school district's decision to replace the track. And so it shows just over $500,000, our 60% share. I just want to be clear. This is a one-time event that's going to replace the track. In other words, this is not a multi-year project where we're going to see something in capital again.
Correct.
Okay, awesome.
Correct.
Thank you. Okay, with that, I'll move for a roll call vote.
Okay. Mr. Columbotus?
Yes.
Mr. Wood?
Yes.
Mr. Moore?
Yes.
Mr. Souza?
Yes.
Mr. Rushton?
Yes.
Mr. Chase?
Yes.
Dr. Perry?
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher?
Yes.
And Mr. George?
Yes.
9-0.
Thank you. Okay, next item is item D, is Resolution R FY 22-006, resolution establishing the town council's vision for Bridgewater. I will defer to Councilor Moore.
Great, thank you, Mr. President. So knowing that we're coming into the planning season, and I think we'll shortly be creating goals for the town council, the town manager, and I think even starting next week, reacting to budget suggestions from other groups. I thought it made sense for us to come together and just make a declaration about what good looks like. Because I think without that, we're at the risk of maybe spending energy and money on the wrong things, on things that don't support the vision. And this has come up, I think, in workshops and certainly in the master plan as well. So I attempted to condense what I understood, kind of the output of some of our workshops and my understanding of the new master plan direction into a short vision that we could use to promote and drive focus. And then also we can refer back to that when making decisions about spend and action. I don't know if it's correct, but I think it might be a good starting point for the conversation. And I thought it would be good to maybe get it into the strategic planning committee to open it up for more discussion and input.
Okay, thank you. I'll entertain a motion to refer that to strategic planning committee.
So moved.
Second.
And so is there any discussion from any members of the council?
It's a good start.
Okay, seeing none, I just want to publicly thank Councilor Moore. Not only your role in rules and procedures, and certainly with this, it's been a fantastic first step, and I appreciate all of the time, energy, and effort that you've put into seeing this through and thinking about it in a systematic way, so that we're in a much better spot going into the end of 2022. With that said, I'll move for a roll call vote.
Mr. George,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
and Mr. Columbotus.
Yes.
9 in favor, 0 against.
Okay, moving on. Next item is citizens' comments. Do we have any citizens wishing to speak during citizens' comments? It looks like I have a Janet's iPad with a hand raised. If you could just name and address, please.
Hi, Janet Hanson, Pleasant Street, Bridgewater. Hello, a long time. I just had a comment, but I think the secretary just did what I want suggesting. She always says 9 to 0, or instead of saying 9 in favor, 0 against, or 8 in favor, 1 against, she should add the words in favor and against to the numbers that she's saying. That's the comment I have. Suggestion, because that's how it usually is. And that way, if somebody's listening, they know what the 9 is and what the 0 is. That's all.
Thank you for your feedback.
Thank you.
Dr. Hunt.
Yes, thank you again. I just wanted to ask the town manager to consider.
Dr. Hunt. Most of us know you. We could just get your name and address.
Austin Street, Bridgewater. Thank you. Sorry about that. I'm so used to my name being called out. Thank you. I just wanted to ask the town manager to relook at the data in a couple of ways that he presented in terms of the comparison. There were no towns in the comparison that include major state facilities such as the prison and the university. Since those entities' population is counted in the per capita, that artificially drives our numbers down that the taxpayers use. So I would like to see a comparison of a couple of the towns that actually have state facilities in terms of their expenditures. I think it's a great comparison, but I think the numbers do a disservice to the town's taxpayers at this point. I do think we are underpay things, but I think it's not quite as dire as is stated there, except for a couple of departments. So I would appreciate that very much, because it's got to be data per capita, data driven by residents, residents non, what do they call it, housed residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other citizens for citizen comments? Oh, I see Mr. Baumgarten.
Hello, everyone. Happy New Year. I just had 4 quickies. One is that as many of you know, very pleased that the replacement of the Bridgewater Rainham track is in the budget. We've been leaping over cracks in that track for many years, so I'm happy about that, although I'm sad for the tennis players. So I want to thank Mr. Moore for bringing forward the resolution tonight. I think having a vision and a focus will be very helpful. I'd also like to ask the council to request of the town manager that we have a public report of what's been happening with the DEI committee, which has now been in session for over a year, or pretty much a year now. And I think it would be good if we had a report of exactly what the ad hoc committee's been up to and where they're headed. And finally, as we move forward into budget season, having just completed the police academy, I've learned a lot about how much mental health issues come up in daily police department activities. And I hope that there will be support for perhaps increased mental health hirings within the police department in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. We have any other citizens for citizen comments? Okay, I don't see any. I'm going to move on to next item is council comments. I'll start with Councilor George.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will pass for tonight.
Thank you, Councilor Gallagher.
Just quickly, Happy New Year, everybody. Looking forward to 2022, whatever it throws at us.
Thank you, Councilor Perry.
Thank you. I too also wish everyone a happy new year and hope everyone had a happy and healthy holiday season. I just want to say thank you to my fellow counselors and a number of other people that reached out. I was down and out with COVID for a few weeks through the holiday season, but we're mostly fully recovered right now and getting back on track. So I just want to thank those that did reach out and again, wish everyone a happy new year.
Thank you. Glad to have you back. Councilor Chase.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just to wish everyone well and in the new year, and hopefully everyone can follow the safe practices recommended in respect of the pandemic and remain healthy and happy through the new year. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilor Souza.
Yes, I'd like to wish everyone a happy and healthy new year and remind everyone, with 31% of those people not being vaccinated at all, wear your mask, protect yourself, protect your family.
Thank you. Councilor Moore.
Thank you, Mr. President. No comments from me tonight.
Thank you. Councilor Wood.
Thank you. Again, Happy New Year. Hopefully everybody stays healthy. I think the number for COVID is greatly underrepresented in Bridgewater. I think Bridgewater's on fire right now, and it's going through the town quickly. I know a lot of people recently that have tested positive, so everybody needs to continue to practice. I want to speak also just for a moment on the common. Being a Lion at this time of year, we always have the holiday decorations up. They'll be coming down. A few will come down tomorrow, the rest on this weekend. If there's anybody out there that can lift 100 pounds, wants to contact me on Facebook, we could use 4 people. They're younger than many of us to help out on Saturday morning. And that brings me to the point that I was late a few minutes tonight. I was at a wake for a friend of mine from the Lions, Eric Rodriguez, passed away very recently. He had cancer for as long as I knew him. It reminds us all that screening is extremely important. But Eric was 90% blind and still had the vision to see that media and, things like, decorations on the common really are quite important. And you'll know him when I mention this, he was the creator of the pumpkin people on the common. Remember the Halloween decorations, the pumpkin people? That was Eric's idea. And he created that whole thing with a few other people. So unfortunately he passed away, but stay healthy, get tested for screening for cancers. As Frank said, mask up. It's going to be a tough couple weeks here, but I think we can make it through, and hopefully we come out better on the other side. Thanks.
Thank you. Councilor Columbotus.
I'd just like to wish everyone Happy New Year. Hopefully this year we'll see increased health and happiness and deal with this pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you. And I have no comments this evening, so we'll move to our next item, executive session. We have none. And entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Second,
Second.
okay, move for a roll call vote.
Mr. Wood,
Yes.
Mr. Moore,
Yes.
Mr. Souza,
Yes.
Mr. Rushton,
Yes.
Mr. Chase,
Yes.
Dr. Perry,
Yes.
Mr. Gallagher,
Yes.
and Mr. George.
Yes.
That's 9 in favor.
Thank you. We're adjourned. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Happy New
Happy
Year.
New Year.
Bye, everybody.